Let's jump in here with the three rebellions here. And I don't know if you've thought of what we're going to talk about next this way, but maybe it just depends what you've heard as far as a podcast or an interview or something else. But I find it useful to ask it this way. If you asked a normal Christian, again, just your average churchgoer, but again, somebody who's not new in the faith, why is humanity so depraved? In other words, why is the world the way it is? Why do we have all this wickedness? Why are things just so bad? The answer you're typically going to get is the fall. But if you asked a Second Temple Jew, again, someone who's living in the Second Temple period, which is roughly, again, we'll just call it for round numbers, 500 BC through the 1st century AD. If you asked one of them the same question, you would not get that answer. It would be part of the answer. What you'd get, well, there are three reasons why the world is the way it is and why it's so bad. For sure, there's the fall. I mean, something did happen in Eden. We have the initial rebellion into God's good world. We have an initial transgression, both divine rebellion, the Nakash, the serpent, and also a human rebellion. But that is not where the story ends. And typically, that is where the story ends for your average Christian. That's the only answer they have in their head. But to someone else, they would say what happened in Genesis 6:1 through 4 is also really serious. Because in their worldview, they believe that the sin of the watchers, the sin of the sons of God of Genesis 6:1 through 4, had a direct impact on why humanity became as bad as it did, and why the flood was a necessity, and why there's still an ongoing problem. So they would include Genesis 6:1 through 4 in their concept of depravity. They would also refer to the judgment at Babel, which we're familiar with because of Genesis 11, but I would dare say that if you've ever heard a sermon or had a Sunday school lesson on the Tower of Babel, you probably never heard Deuteronomy 32:8 and 9 brought into the picture. Therefore, you never really learned the rationale for what happens at Babel and the impact that has on biblical theology in a very broad scope. This is according to Deuteronomy 32:8, 9. When the Most High divided up the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. So we know who the Most High is. We know what the division of nations is. But God did all that stuff according to the number of the sons of God. But Israel, verse 9, is Yahweh's portion. Jacob is his allotted inheritance. So you have this allotment language going on. Now, if we traced, and we will in our time here, these ideas through Deuteronomy a little bit, you come out with a totally different worldview. It's the basis for why the Old Testament, really the rest of the Bible, is Israel against the nations and Yahweh against the gods. And there's an antipathy there. There's a hostility there. So the Second Temple Jew would say, well, there's three rebellions. There's three kind of events that led to, contribute to why the world is the way it is. And why we as believers, we who follow Yahweh, or we who follow Christ, Yahweh incarnate, what we're up against. It's not just the Garden of Eden. It's bigger than that. And that becomes a real part of, quote unquote, the unseen realm when we're talking about the black hats and the white hats. Okay? All of that matters in, again, the mindset of the ancient Israelite, the mindset of the 1st century Jew. So let's talk a little bit about each. Again, you can get the book for the details. The fall, of course, we're familiar with. I view this as a divine rebellion story. That doesn't mean that, Adam wasn't there and Adam didn't sin and, Adam's sin really had a profound impact on humanity. Of course, all those things are kind of no-brainers. But you would be amazed at how many evangelical Old Testament scholars do not want to put too much emphasis on the Nachash, the serpent figure, in the story, and absolutely refuse to look at Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 as having anything to do with that story. There are academic, scholarly reasons for that. And I will, since I'm being recorded, let me be careful. That's nonsense, okay? All right? There are really good academic reasons to not resist those connections. And what I try to do in the book is, again, make some of those accessible for you. I think I have two, yeah. There are two charts in the book, and these are points of connection between, again, divine counsel passages, divine rebellion passages, both in and outside the Bible, in all three of these passages, and even a little bit more. In other words, there's a lot that connects the three. And I can tell you, again, maybe in Q&A, why this stuff gets ignored. But here you have Nakash, you have serpent language, you have Hallel ben Shakar, the shining language, brought down, cut down, cast down. The earth, the Eretz, which is another word for the underworld, Sheol. Okay, Rephaim, Malachim. Okay, all of these terms, again, they all show up in all three of these passages. And scholars will recognize that Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 are connected. I mean, all you got to do is read them. They kind of sound the same. Just one, Isaiah is the prince of Babylon, and Ezekiel is the prince of Tyre, and all this kind of stuff. My argument is at the back of both of these passages. These passages aren't about Eden or about Genesis 3, but that story is in the background to both of them. And the story is a story of divine rebellion. Many evangelical scholars will say, you go to Ezekiel 28 where it talks about the anointed cherub. Well, that isn't a divine being there. That isn't Satan. That isn't, that's language, that you can't take that way. Because what they don't tell you is they're following the Septuagint because they think the Masoretic text is messed up. They're following the Septuagint, and if you follow that textual tradition, Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, then you have the anointed cherub with someone in the garden, and the other someone would have to be Adam, and so Ezekiel 28 is really about Adam, because the prince of Tyre was a human being, so this is really about Adam. It has nothing to do with Genesis 3 back there. Well, that ignores all the places where Ezekiel 28 touches divine rebellion stories that some of it comes straight out of Ugaritic material. It's just word for word, point for point. And what I do in the book is I try to take people through this, introduce you to the ideas. I get into it more on the companion website to the book. If you haven't been there, even if you've read the book, I recommend going there, snooping around a little bit. Moreunseenrealm.com. I'll take you through the different views, but I quote at length there a dissertation by, I think he teaches at Notre Dame now. No, that's where he got his degree. I don't know where he is. Hugh Rowland Page, his dissertation was on the divine rebellion motif in Ugaritic and biblical material. It's really good. He does a nice job of laying it out. Okay, all these connections, and he's not the only one. There's lots of stuff on this. So I'm telling you, just to be up front here. My view of this is not the mainstream view you're going to find in most commentaries. It is a view you will find in the scholarly literature. I ain't making it up. I didn't just wake up someday and say, I got a neat alternative. I need this for the book. Thank you, Lord. Okay, that is not it. The dirty little secret is there is nothing in the book. There is nothing in the unseen realm that is unique to me. I didn't have an original idea in my head. Okay, what my role is synthesizing all of this stuff. And I can take the scholarly literature and my bibliography literally. I'm not embellishing now because I've collected it for 15 years. My bibliography, the real one, the one that I obviously didn't tack onto the book, is longer than the book. Okay, I have almost 5,300 entries in my personal bibliography that I have, online in this Divine Council bibliography thing that I have, talked about a little bit. I'm not making it up. Okay, my job is to make that accessible to people who care about the content. That's it. That's end of mystery. Okay, there's nothing else going on here. It's that simple and dull and boring, okay? But I'm just telling you that because somebody here could go off and pull a commentary off, oh, this isn't what Dr. So-and-so says, Mike must be wrong. Well, there are lots of people that Mike can draw on to defend Mike's view. It is not Mike's view. Right? Just telling you. Okay, so honesty cuts both ways there. Now, Nakash, again, if you've read the episode, and the book especially, my view of Nakash, again, is not that we shouldn't translate Nakash as serpent. That's evil. That's a sin. Mike says don't do that. Okay, that isn't the point. The point is that the term Nakash is actually a pretty layered term. It conveys more than one idea. Okay, profound statement number 4. Okay? Any given word in any given language is capable of conveying more than one idea. Okay? Nakash is like any other one. As a noun, hanakash in Hebrew, can mean serpent. Just fine, works well, no problem. It could also be hanakash, just the consonants could also be, sorry for the grammar spasm, a participle, which means it comes from a verb with a definite article attached prefix to it. And you could translate it, the one who dispenses divine knowledge, the one who practices divination, something like that. And certainly that happens in the story, doesn't it? Okay? If it's an adjective with a definite article, then you could translate it as the shining one. And luminescent vocabulary for divine beings is ubiquitous throughout the Bible. It is a stock vocabulary thing. So that wouldn't be unusual either, especially if you think Isaiah 14 is drawing on the same story of divine rebellion against the Most High God, because there you get Hallel ben Shakar, the shining one, the son of the dawn. Over in Ezekiel 28, we have the mysterious figure who the Masoretic text refers to as the cherub. There is no Adam in the Masoretic text version, it's just the cherub. He is adorned with precious gems and jewels, and they shine. What an odd coincidence. Again, nothing to look at, citizen. You can read the passage in different ways, and my suggestion is that the ancient person would have read the passage and had all of these things floating around in their head. Because, again, they know the terminology, they know the language, they know the possibilities. They use all these terms in different ways. They're not reading it with only one thing in mind. And, let's be honest, besides that point, they know, Israelites are smart enough to know that snakes don't normally talk. Okay? And so this is a very common way in ancient Near Eastern literature. When you wanted to depict a divine being meeting a human being, having a conversation or whatever, it's very common to cast the divine being as an animal. Egypt does this a lot. Story of the shipwrecked sailor, again, the god is a giant snake there. I mean, this is common stuff. So if you're a literate Israelite, again, and you've read some other of your neighbors' literary stuff, these stories about their gods and their religion, this is going to be really normative to you. Oh, I know who. She's not really talking to a member of the animal kingdom. She's talking to a divine being disguised as one. I mean, it's just the simplest thing in the world to them. So why we as Christians, again, this is something I've had difficulty wrapping my own mind around, why there's resistance to Mike saying things like, this wasn't just an ordinary run-of-the-mill member of the animal kingdom. And maybe when we talk about Hanakash, we can talk about the alternatives. Why that all of a sudden is like, oh, that's just ridiculous, that's horrible, oh, I don't listen to this guy. Okay, hey, the New Testament tells you who this was. Okay, it doesn't. It tells you that this is the Satan, this is the devil. I mean, it uses other terms, not just serpent or snake. So what's the problem? Again, I don't really know what the problem is, other than things like scholars know that the word Satan in Hebrew never occurs in Genesis 3. In fact, it never occurs in Isaiah 14 or Ezekiel 28. So we can't talk about Satan in the Old Testament and being in the garden, because our scholarly comrades would just laugh us out of the room. They would think, don't you know your vocabulary? Well, yeah, I do, and guess what? Jesus knew that too. Okay, the apostles knew that too. But they also felt very free to identify, to use the term Satan or Satanas in Greek. Okay? They had no problem using the term of that enemy. The shoe fit, so let's wear it. Okay, Satan just means adversary, opponent. Okay, use a word like diabolos, liar, because he is. Again, the fact that you don't have the vocabulary connection in one testament, that means we can't talk about it at all. Well, I got news for you. In the intertestamental period, they're doing this all the time, and that's why the New Testament has it too, because these terms are being used to describe that enemy. And there's like no referee with a whistle. He doesn't blow the whistle. Oh, you can't use this term referencing Genesis 3 because it's not there. Like, again, I don't know why scholars think the way they do half the time, because it's like, I can't say this thing unless there's a bunny trail everywhere that I want to go. Well, the people you're studying, the text you're studying, didn't need the bunny trail. They do it. So just kind of go with the flow. Loosen up. There it is. Just make the connections. They do it too, and you'll be okay. Okay, like your degree's not going to disintegrate off your wall. Okay, if you do this, it really isn't. I've tried. Okay, it's not going to happen. But scholars just think differently than normal people, I guess. Genesis 6, okay, again, we're all familiar with this passage, sons of God, daughters of men. Nephilim on the earth in those days and also afterward. Well, for sure, we need to strip the supernatural out of this puppy, because this one just gets a little weird, so the sons of God have to be just normal guys, and the Nephilim have to just be normal guys and girls doing what guys and girls do, and it's just awful. Isn't it? And if you've read the book, or if you've heard me at any point, you know that I think views that try to strip the supernatural out of Genesis 6, and I have to be careful here, are ridiculous. Did I use that word already? And what I mean by that is, look, nobody, people who are reading these texts who were not sort of conditioned to not let them say what they plainly say, took a supernatural view of this. They weren't troubled, by some of the questions that pop into our heads. Well, how does this work? Again, they're not there. They reflexively do this, and two of the people that do that are Peter and Jude. So now you got a problem. Which is why you'll read all sorts of exegetical gymnastics that will say things like, Peter and Jude, they weren't thinking about Genesis 6. Well, what about the angels that sinned? Oh, well, that was some other rebellion that we probably don't have preserved. Well, that's nice. So in other words, you're basing your position on something that doesn't exist in the text, right? Yes, that would be correct. But they'll be content to do that. Well, what about the great rebellion of the third of the angels and all this stuff, before creation and all this kind of stuff? I've tried really hard to find that in Genesis, but I can't. In fact, the only place you will find it in Revelation 12 associates it with the first coming of the Messiah, which was a little after creation. Okay, so the chronology doesn't work there. The only reference you get to angels sinning is Genesis 6. And not only that, but Peter will use vocabulary like having them being chained in gloomy darkness. Okay, tartarao, sent to Tartarus, which again our translation is typically obscure. It'll have hell or Hades or something like that. Well, that's vocabulary that comes right out of the Greco-Roman Titan story, and there are actually two Titan stories, but one of them has, again, cohabitation between divine beings and human women, and they produce kind of funky offspring. Okay, this is just what you get. And Peter and Jude are obviously familiar with that stuff, and they're not flustered by it at all. They embrace it, they bring it into their text, it just is what it is. So you can say that Peter and Jude were wrong. I mean, you can do that, but that's basically what you have to do to eviscerate or cut the supernatural out of Genesis 6:1-4. But having said all that, what I think the real significant thing is the Mesopotamian context. Now, I don't have a lot of this in Unseen Realm, so unless you have read Anas's article, and I've recommended it several times on my website. If you go up to my website, and it is actually working today. It wasn't working earlier this week, but we knew about that. If you put in his last name, Annus, and put in something like Watchers, okay, you're going to find this article on my site. It is available online. I don't know who posted it online, but it's there, so go get it. But the reason why this is important, Annas is not the first. He's not the first person to draw attention to, before his time, people would say is a possible context for Genesis 6:1-4. He is the person who's done the most work here, and it's very recent. So his article that you can get on my site was written in 2010. What that means is that every commentary that your pastor has, that he's going to pull off the shelf to resist you and your ideas and Mike and his ideas, is by definition obsolete out of the gate. If it's not written past 2010, and if it doesn't interact with this material, it doesn't have a prayer of interpreting the passage in its own context. That's just the way it is. He may not like it, but that's the way it is. Scholars actually do stuff and they learn things. I know that's kind of shocking. Okay, but they don't just sit there and twiddle their. If they were like medical doctors, you could say, oh, they're playing golf. And what do the other ones do? They play asteroids or something, or Angry Birds. That's what they do all day. Some of them are at the asteroid fair. I would be. The scholarship advances, and Anas's article is a wonderful case of it. I'm going to take you through some of what he says in the article. In the Mesopotamian story, there's a backstory here that is very clear that this is what Genesis 6:1-4 was shooting at. This is why these 4 verses even exist in the text. The writer was shooting at something very, very deliberate. This is a quote from Anas, the Mesopotamian apkalus. Now, apakalu was a Mesopotamian. Before the flood, they were completely divine. After the flood, they're not. Okay? After the flood, they're for lack of a better term, they're a mixture. They're a hybrid between divine and human, and they also happen to be giants. Okay? If it gives you a little idea where we're headed here. Okay, apakalu were the wise men. They are cast as the culture heroes of Mesopotamia, the great divine minds that brought civilization to humans, dispensed it from their divine realm to humans, and this is the Mesopotamian explanation for why they're just so great. Why Mesopotamia is just so great, especially Babylon. Okay, this is why we're ahead of the game, because the gods gave us all this knowledge. That's who the apkalus were. Now, the apkalus are the ones who are going to get demonized as the sons of God, and their sons, the Nephilim. And those figures in later Enochic literature appear as the Watchers and the Giants, illegitimate teachers of humankind. So Anas is saying this is the focus point, these apakalu guys. Greenfield in DDD, Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, if you're going to buy one reference book about this kind of stuff, this is the one, DDD. Says this: in Mesopotamian religion, the term apakalu, Sumerian Abgal, is used for the legendary creatures endowed with extraordinary wisdom. 7 in number, they are the culture heroes from before the flood. Scholars of Mesopotamia, the scribes, Anas points out, the guys who were in charge of, the professors of their day, if you will, in Mesopotamia, they wanted to align themselves with the apakalu, basically saying, well, we're so smart because we're in touch with the divine knowledge. We inherited it from them. And so they'd have an uppity student at some point in one of their classes say, well, how did you get that after the flood? Like, how do you... And so this is their version of how that knowledge was transmitted. Scholarly writings of the scribes in Mesopotamia are specifically linked to the apakalu by a very deliberate tactic. The scribes would title their own works with names given to the apakalu. This telegraphed the point that I'm your professor because I'm in touch with the gods. Okay, we inherited this information from them. So shut up and listen. Okay, we know what we're talking about. Other Mesopotamian texts actually provide evidence for 4 post-flood apakalu. These apakalu are key players, again, in understanding Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So to give you the story, the apakalu are running around, and they're the heroes because they're giving humans knowledge. They're wonderful. But some of the other gods don't really like humans. They're just, again, they're kind of icky. They make a lot of noise, so we got to get rid of them. In some of the Mesopotamian stories, that's like, they're too noisy down there, let's just kill them off. So don't laugh. You probably thought that with your kids. It's just right. So they decide, okay, we're going to send the flood. We're going to put a stop to all this. We're going to punish them. And again, there are different versions for why the flood comes in Mesopotamia. But the apakalu, again, there's this concern about, well, we've taught them all this stuff, and what's going to happen? How do we deal with this issue now? And so, what you have is the story of the flood, and then after the flood, you actually have texts that list out the apakalu next to the king that they trained. Okay, and then you have the flood, and then after the flood, there's a text that has 4 post-flood apakalu, and they are specifically described from that point on in a different way than they are pre-flood. Before the flood, they're classified in cuneiform as completely divine, but after the flood, they are said to be of human descent. Again, the only possible implication is that they had at least one human parent. And more than that, one of them is described as being only 2/3 apakalu. So you have, again, this sort of hybridized kind of language used of the apakalu after the flood. The 2/3 description becomes important because this is the same description as our Gilgamesh expert, Brian, can tell us. This is the description used of Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh is going to be linked to the apakalu in some pretty specific ways. But presumably, this is Ann Kilmer now. She's another scholar who actually wrote before Anas. But this is about all she says in her article. She doesn't really run with it. She says, humans and apakalu could presumably mate, since we have a description of the 4 post-flood apakalu as of human descent, the 4th only 2/3, as opposed to pre-flood pure apakalu and subsequent human sages, the umanu. So, you have this mixture, but then you get this hybridization thing going on. Now, we're not told directly that Marduk is angry because of the cohabitation, but what we are told is that after the flood, they are of human descent, the apakalu are, and Marduk is ticked. Marduk gets angry with the apakalu and consigns them to the netherworld, never to return. Does that sound familiar? Okay. So we get that much in the Mesopotamian material. They violate the divine order, again, the way Marduk wanted things to happen in the Babylonian version. Somehow, some sort of cohabitation is part of that. before they were divine. Then we've got a mixture after the flood. Marduk's mad, sends them to the underworld. And again, back to the 2/3 thing. Let's skip ahead here. The 2/3 thing used of Gilgamesh is important because Gilgamesh is not only called master of the apakalu, but he's also described as a giant. Now, that's the real quick and dirty version of every point in Genesis 6:1 through 4 has a counterpoint in the Mesopotamian apakalu story. That ought to suggest that, again, when the biblical writer writes Genesis 6:1 through 4, it's not a coincidence that what is written there matches up to this Mesopotamian story. And not only that, but if we go back here, again, and we talk about where they're sent, the underworld, they're kept in a chasm, the Apsu, an abyss containing fiery pillars situated at the end of the great earth. Great earth is an unusual phrase. It's a name in the netherworld, for the netherworld in Mesopotamian texts. Kigal in Sumerian, the expression is found in the name of the Mesopotamian queen of the underworld, Eresh Kigal, the great earth, okay? They wind up in, for lack of a better term, Mesopotamian hell. It's not hell like we think of in the New Testament, but it's the underworld. It's the realm of the dead. The Enochian material, the material written after the biblical stuff but before the New Testament, okay, intertestamental, Second Temple Jewish literature, for some reason, and there are academic explanations for this that make sense, but again, the quick version is, for some reason, whoever's writing the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees and some of these other books, the book of the giants from Qumran, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, whoever's writing this stuff knew the apakalu story really well. And they write their version of Genesis 6:1 through 4 with the apakalu story in mind. So this is why Enoch has the offending watchers being sent to the realm of the dead and bound, because that's what happens to the apakalu. We don't read that in Genesis 6. You only got 4 verses there. You get hints of it a little bit later with some of the Rephaim who live in the netherworld and passages like Ezekiel 32. You get little bits and pieces of it. But whoever's writing the Enochian stuff is really well aware of this. And they preserve the original context for Genesis 6:1 through 4. That's what they actually end up doing. We can know about it because we can go back today and read cuneiform stuff. That's what Anos did. That's what his whole article is about. Let's go back through, look at all the cuneiform stuff. Can we find, have an eye toward Genesis 6:1 through 4? Can we find that stuff in the Mesopotamian flood stories? Let's take another look at it. And so he did in 2010, and the results are just awesome. I mean, he did a great job. So we can look at that and we can kind of know, what they're sort of fishing for, because if we know the Mesopotamian apakalu story, we can read Genesis 6:1 through 4 and say, okay, sons of God, daughters of men, Nephilim, before and after the flood. Okay, we know what they're shooting at. But it's the Enoch stuff that adds their punishment. And that's the stuff that Peter and Jude pick up on and winds up in Peter and Jude. So you have a connection here. You've got Mesopotamian, original context, you got Old Testament, you've got Second Temple period Judaism, and you got the New Testament. And there are threads that run through all 4 of them. It doesn't mean they're all canonical or inspired. Again, that doesn't mean that at all. But what it means is that if you go back to Genesis 6:1 through 4 and say, I don't like this creepy supernatural stuff, I'm just going to take that out. You break the chain. You lose the original context. And you not only lose the original context, but you pit your interpretation of Genesis 6 against what Peter and Jude are doing. And what Peter and Jude are doing, they're doing specifically because they know all the other stopping points. You don't, they do. So when you take one away, you not only mess up the meaning of the passage, but you create sort of a conundrum. I'll say it negatively this way. You put your context up against theirs and assume yours is superior. That's what you do. And you might be doing that because you want to protect people. You don't want people to think the Bible's this weird book with all the... Think about this. You don't want the Bible to seem like it's a spooky supernatural book. Okay. Like, what's so normal about the virgin birth? Like, what's so normal about the hypostatic union? What's so normal? I mean, come on. But this is... You'll actually... I mean, I've had conversations with people where that's too creepy and weird, you know. Like, have you read the Bible at all? I mean, a lot of it is creepy and weird. Like, I mean, it's not like, you know, Anne of Green Gables or something. I mean, it's just not that all the time. It just isn't. And I like Anne of Green Gables, by the way. So I'm not dissing that. It's not a negative example. But, you know, for the life of me, I you know, even to this day, I mean, I know why people do it, but I still don't get it, because you have to literally turn a blind eye to what is going on. And it gets even worse or even better, depending on your perspective. This is the coolest thing for me in Annis's article. Archaeologists have actually uncovered figures of apakalu. There's actually a whole book where you can get illustrations of apakalu. You know? And apakalu, again, realize before the flood, you know, they're neutral. Before the flood, they're completely divine. They could be good or evil, whatever. After the flood, then that's when they get punished. That's when Marduk doesn't like them and all that. But they used to be buried underneath buildings, underneath foundations of buildings, to avert evil from the house or whatever the building was. Well, they're given a name. The figurines are called matsare, which literally means in Akkadian, watchers. Oh, well, that doesn't mean watchers like over here. It just, that's just a coincidence. No, I mean, you know, Annis goes in, and he's not the only one. There's a guy named Stuckenbrook who writes a lot about the term virine, watchers. You know, that's what they called them. And so whoever's writing Enoch, again, to make sure that we don't miss the fact that I'm writing this about those apakalu guys, okay, he actually takes the term watchers and puts it into Aramaic so that you get it. You can't miss it now. Hello, it's right over here. When you read this, I want you to be thinking of that. And they were. We aren't. Because we either, again, don't, you know, we know about the Old Testament and the New Testament. We don't know about this Mesopotamian stuff and, that awful Second Temple stuff, that Enoch stuff. That's just heretical. Don't read that. Okay, you know, so we know 2 of the 4 points. We don't connect them. And then on top of that, we strip the supernatural out of it and we go, now we understand the passage. Really? Really? Can you explain that to me again? Again, they would not have made these mistakes, but we do. Now, part of the Watcher story, before we get into the Babel thing, is the apakalu in Mesopotamia, and this is why the story's there. This is why it's important. It wasn't just about a bunch of wise divine beings who happened to make Babel great, okay? Well, that's nice. Well, if you're a biblical person, if you're a biblical writer, if you're an Israelite or a Jew, you know, living later on, what do you think of Babylon? Oh, I love those guys. No. You're sitting there like in Ezekiel 1 by the river Kivar saying, we are the people of God. What in God's name are we doing here? How in the world did this happen to us? It's the exile. You don't like Babel. Okay, you don't like Babylon. But the Babylonians are having a field day with this. Okay, well, we know why we're better. Our gods are better. Marduk, you know, he's just a great guy, you know. And you know, we're just so far ahead of you, little, you know, Neanderthals, to use an anachronistic term. We're just so far ahead of you because we have the knowledge of the gods. So of course we win. Of course we're great. Of course there's none like us. So the biblical writers want to say, well, okay, we actually look at this a little differently. We don't think this was a good thing for the apakalu to share divine knowledge with humans because it actually contributed to their corruption. If you go back, and Anas's article actually lists this, the craftsmen apakalu that are listed, they bear a close resemblance to all the knowledge that the Watchers gave that corrupted humankind. Okay. Warfare arts, arts of seduction, astrology, all of those are apakalu guys in the Mesopotamian stuff. Again, whoever's writing Enoch knows exactly what he's doing. Exactly what he's doing. This is bad, this is evil, this is wicked. It made people worse. It made them wicked, it made them corrupt. It didn't make you great, it made you awful. Look at yourself. You know, and not only that, but this whole idea of your knowledge and these apakalu surviving the flood, you know, in like Gilgamesh, the giants and stuff like this, not only did the knowledge make you bad and make you evil and corrupt humanity, but it actually resulted in certain people groups coming out of that specifically we had to fight, we had to go up against in the conquest, who were bent on our annihilation. This was not a good thing. And so Genesis 6:1-4 is there to say just that. These are not good guys. This is not a good thing. You need to look at this differently. And then you get, you know, in the prophets, you get the whole Marduk versus Yahweh thing going on. That's, you know, there's a lot of that in the prophets. I mean, the biblical writers are constantly trying to say, God is still in control. We are still the people of God. We got our butts kicked because we're apostates, because we deserved it. And yes, the innocent do suffer with the guilty. But that's why we're here. But it's also why, you know, because God is still in control, why we're not going to be left here either. So Genesis 6:1-4 is again trying to awaken their own readers to the fact that, look, no matter what you hear from these Babylonian people, okay, they are not inherently superior. Their gods are not superior to our God. This was not a good thing. Okay, you need to be thinking differently about this whole series of events. Because out of what they think is wonderful, there were certain people groups, certain bloodlines that sought our extermination. We're still here. Okay, we're in exile, but we're still here. And we're here because God helped us defeat them. And he's going to do it again. It's why, you know, episodes in the conquest, Numbers 13 is connected back to Genesis 6:4. It's why we get the dimensions of Og's bed, which correspond precisely to the dimensions of Marduk's sacred marriage bed. Creating connections. Okay, that's what they're about. So the world is messed up, and we're in a bad place, but we're not going to be here forever. It's a very deliberate reason. And then the Babel event, again, Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High divided the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. If your Bible doesn't say that, it might say, well, it would say sons of Israel. And again, you can read my article that I linked to, or I linked to it on the website, on my Divine Council website, thedivinecouncil.com. You know, I have a journal article on this. You can get all the text critical stuff and impress your friends and all this. You know, talk about, you know, origins, hexapla, and all that. Okay, you don't need any of that. It's good because it's reality. Okay, you need to realize that what I'm saying here is based in textual information. But all you really need to do is think about the passage. Passages that say, when the Most High divided the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of Israel. Okay, well, the division of the nations, if that goes back to Babel, why would sons of Israel make any sense? Well, it doesn't, because Israel didn't exist yet. it creates a conundrum with the flow of biblical history. God's not going to be dividing the nations up according to a nation that doesn't exist yet. It only exists afterwards, because that's where you get verse 9. Israel is Yahweh's portion. Now, this is a picture of the Dead Sea Scroll that reads sons of God. The correct reading is sons of God. I could fill your afternoon with text critical reasons why sons of God is the correct reason, or the correct reading. But again, you just need to think about what's going on in the passage. The division of the nations, Babel. Israel doesn't exist yet. Israel's not listed in the table of nations. The nations that were supposed to be the ones that got divided, you go back and read Genesis 10, go through the list, guess who's not there? Israel is not there. It's not there for a very good reason, because God hasn't called Abraham yet. He does that in chapter 12. And what's the teaching point? You know, the whole point is, what is Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9 describing? Contrary to God's wishes for people after the flood to carry out the Edenic mandate. Okay, now let's go make the world like Eden was. Let's restore God's good rule. Let's restore the kingdom. You know, let's tell the world about the true God and do all this Edenic original stuff. You know, let's kickstart the kingdom of God here again. But to do that, you got to go out there and do it. Instead, no, we congregate here at Shinar, at Babel, and we want to make a name for ourselves, so we're going to build this tower. Okay, we want to become famous. Well, you know, again, everybody agrees in Old Testament scholarship that this is a ziggurat, step kind of pyramid thing. You know, you get them in Mesopotamia, including one in Babylon. Well, what was one of those? They were part of temple complexes. So if you build one and you want it to reach high into the sky, because the gods live there too, and we don't, you know, the mountains, gardens, the sky, the ocean, you know, all this kind of stuff. What you're doing is you're building a house for the deity. You want the deity to come to you. You want the true God to come here. That's what's going to make you famous. If you want to talk to the true God, you come here. We build him a house. God says, no. I will not be tamed. I am not on a leash. The idea wasn't for me to come to you. It's for you to do what I told you to do. Because we have this thing, this Edenic thing, the kingdom of God thing that I want to cover the whole earth. We got to get that started again, fellas. Let's go. And they're thinking, no. Let's build one of these, and God will come to us. And so God gets fed up. And he disinherits humanity. He divorces them. So when the Most High scatters the nations, he says, fine, you don't want me to be your God. You want somebody else to be your God, maybe no God at all, but you don't want me, or else you'd be listening to what I say. Let's try that out. I'm going to divorce you, disinherit you. There's no longer going to be a direct relationship between you and me. I'm going to assign you. I'm going to allot you under the rulership, under the authority of lesser Elohim. I'm going to put you under the authority of the sons of God. Now we know from what Paul says in Acts 17. I mean, Paul had an inkling that, okay, this is somehow, you know, what the fixing of the boundaries of the nations was somehow going to be part of God's plan for bringing people to the knowledge of the true God and ultimately to the gospel. And you know, again, Paul has this inkling. Well, again, think about the Old Testament logic. What God does is he divorces them, and then he says, okay, I'm going to show you how it was supposed to be done. I've divorced all of you, so now I need a new people. Okay, I'm going to go over to this guy, Abraham, in Ur, and I'm going to call him, and he's too old to have kids, and his wife's too old to have kids, but now watch. Okay, I'm going to raise up for myself my own inheritance. Jacob is my allotted heritage. Israel is my portion on the planet. I've consigned the rest of you under the authority of other lesser Elohim. Hopefully they will rule according to my justice. They'll be like me. Hopefully you will be able to look at my people now, Israel, as what life would be like if you were living in relationship to me. And if my people follow the law, they'll be happy. They'll have good lives. I will bring them to a land. They'll enjoy life. That land is now sort of a mini Eden or a new Eden. At least it's supposed to be, because I'm there. I'm there. Heaven is going to meet earth again. I will occupy that space. That will be sacred space. They will be a kingdom of priests between me and you. And they're supposed to attract you back to wanting a relationship with me, not one of these other guys. So let's see how that goes. Of course, it doesn't go well, because according to Psalm 82, the gods become corrupt. They seduce the Israelites into worshiping them. The whole thing, just sort of blows up, because humans are wicked, because they are corrupted, again, by other forces, outside of their own nature. And we have a lot working against us, okay? But this was the plan. This is the rest of the biblical story. This is why it's Israel against the nations. It's why it's Yahweh against the gods. Because this relationship deteriorates into one of hostility and antipathy. It becomes a turf war. This is why when Paul talks about the forces of darkness, he uses the word demons a few times. He does that when he quotes Deuteronomy 32. But look at his vocabulary. Principalities, powers, rulers, authorities, thrones, dominions. They all have one thing in common. They are all terms used in other contexts of geographical dominion. Okay? Paul uses it because that's what the Old Testament worldview is. That's the worldview he inherits. Daniel 10, attaching divine beings, princes, prince of Persia, prince of Greece, to what's going on geopolitically down here. This is the Old Testament worldview. But it's rivalry, it's antipathy, it's hostility. It's not what it's supposed to be. And so ultimately the Messiah he doesn't just have to deal with what happened in the Garden of Eden, does he? The Messiah has to deal with the corruption brought by the Watchers in Genesis 6. You've got to fix that problem too. See, the Genesis 3 problem is about the fact that now that you've aligned yourself to the Nakash, and I've cast the Nakash down to the realm of the dead, you went with him. He, in effect, owns your soul. You will die, and you will not be in relationship to me. You are not only cast out of the garden, there is no more Eden. You are not only going to die mortally, but you will be forever separated from me. That's a problem. God wants to fix that. So that's what needs to be fixed out of Genesis 3. What needs to be fixed out of Genesis 6 is human depravity, just generally, broadly speaking. And what happens to be fixed, or what needs to be fixed out of Genesis 11 is the Messiah is not just the Messiah to the Jew only. I want every nation back into the fold. Every tongue, every language, every race, every fill in the blank, it all has to come back full circle to me. So we've got 3 rebellions that the Messiah needs to take care of, not just one. And if you have that in your head, you will read certain passages, and again, some bells and whistles will go off of what the New Testament writer is thinking. Now, a lot of that content, is going to be foreign. I'm actually, the book I'm working on now, since you came here, I can tell you about the book, secret knowledge here. Now, I'm working on a book that is tentatively titled, and I like the title, so of course I lost my last title, but I really wanted The Myth That Was True for the Unseen Realm, but anyway, I lost that battle. I'm not going to lose this one. It's titled to be called Reversing Hermon. Hermon was where the Watchers descended, to do, they make their pact together to corrupt humanity. And the subtitle is The Importance of the Sin of the Watchers story in the New Testament. Because the New Testament trickles into the New Testament in lots of places. that you wouldn't ordinarily just sort of pick up on. And I'm astonished, there's no book been written like this. All of the elements, I was reading a dissertation on the plane. It's going to be part of a chapter. In scholarly literature, this stuff is commonly discussed, but nobody's assembled it into one book and talked about, hey, why is Enoch important for New Testament interpretation? Okay, so that's where we're going with that. But there's just a lot of it that bleeds into things. Cosmic geography, again, we can stop here. What time is it? Is it a good time to stop, or should we? 11:24. Yeah, good time to stop. But yeah, the cosmic geography, again, we've tried to track through the three. Should I go to noon? We can just do some of the 2 power stuff. Okay. Cosmic geography, it is important because it not only sort of sets the tone for Israel and the nations and the whole gospel plan about the Messiah not just being for Israel, but again, the nations being a target of this. But there are also places in the Old Testament, again, that are more readily comprehensible if you have this cosmic geography thing rolling around in your head. I have a list here. We can include some others. I've already mentioned Daniel 10. But in 1 Samuel 26, remember when David is running away from Saul, like he does most of the time? He's running away from Saul, and he has to leave Judah, and he has to go live with the Philistines for a while. And he says in this passage, oh, woe is me, is Mike's translation. Oh, woe is me. What am I going to do now? How can I pray to the Most High? How can I pray? How can I talk to God? And you're thinking, well, just talk, David. That's what we do, Or, is David denying omnipresence? Well, of course not. What he's talking about here is David has a sense that for me to be in communication with Yahweh, my God, I need to be in Yahweh's turf. And I'm no longer there. I'm like living over where other gods are. And he has this sense that I'm kind of cut off here. Is God going to listen to me because of what's my situation? So it gives you a little feel for it. Naaman the leper, 2 Kings 5, is a favorite story here. Again, you probably heard me go through this, so again, just rapidly. For those who haven't, this is one of those Sunday school passages, Sunday school stories that we hear all the time. Naaman has leprosy. The little slave girl that, wound up in Syria, says to him, well, what's your problem, Captain? You got leprosy. Why don't you just go down and talk to the prophet? He'll take care of that. And he looks at her like, who are you? But, she convinces him, go talk to the prophet. You'll take care of your leprosy problem. So he gets his buddies, his soldier companions. They go down. The prophet won't even come out to meet him. Yeah, I know who you are. Big deal. You're not even worth my time to come out of the tent. Go wash yourself in the Jordan 7 times and get out of here. Okay, again, paraphrasing. And he's insulted. And he's ready to go home. He throws a little temper tantrum. Doesn't this guy know who I am? And one of his assistants says, well, if he had told you to do something spectacular, like would you have done it? Well, sure. That's what I was expecting. Well, he gave you something simple to do. Why don't you just go do it? Okay, so he goes, dips himself 7 times, comes out clean. Okay, again, we all know the story. He's making fun of the Jordan while he's on his way. This little, who peed in this thing? It's really bad. So, but he comes out clean, and so now he's thrilled. Okay, he goes back to Elisha, and this time the prophet will talk to him, and he says, now I know that Yahweh is the God of gods. Well, that's a good thing to know. It comes in handy. And then what does he ask for permission to take back with him? Dirt. He said, can I load my mule with as much dirt as it'll carry? And then he tries to explain a little bit. We only get a little bit of an explanation. Look, I'm an important guy, and part of my job is I live in Syria. I got to go into the temple of Ramon, and the king, I take the king in there. We do this little fiddle-faddle thing. he goes in there with me, and he's old, and when he bends over, I kind of got to hold on to him, and he holds on to me. And you get this whole rigmarole, and we don't know what he wants to do with the dirt. Like, is he going to put some in his pockets? Wear a little around his neck in a pouch? Is he going to throw some in there? The Temple of Ramon, so he can walk, over, holy ground. But that's the point. That's why he's asking for dirt. He wants Yahweh's dirt because it's Yahweh. It's either going to protect him, or he just wants Yahweh to know that, okay, I got to go into this temple, but I'm still like your guy. Again, he doesn't know much, but what he knows that that dictates his response. And Elisha says, "Yeah, that'll work. Go ahead, take all you can carry. Have fun. I got an extra bag in the back. So again, it's just this story. That in 1 Samuel, when the Ark of the Covenant gets taken by the Philistines. Again, we love to laugh at this one in Sunday school. And, they put the Ark in the temple of Dagon. Dagon gets his arms and his limbs chopped off and his head. He's just a stump, ha ha ha. And it is funny. Okay, I'll admit it. It's kind of comical. But what we miss is that when the priests say, okay, we got to get rid of this thing, just send it on a cart and get it out of here. And we miss this little throwaway line in 1 Samuel, I think it's either 4 or 5. I think it's 4. I can't remember exactly, but it says, "To this day, the priests of Dagon refuse to walk over the threshold where they found Dagon." I mean, there they are. They're in their own temple, and it's like, oh, there's the spot we found Dagon. Let's walk around. Okay, why? Because they know it's under dominion. That is not Dagon's turf anymore. This is where Dagon was defeated. Right here. We aren't taking any chances. We don't want to end up like Dagon. Okay? I mean, they just have this sense that of this, again, just geographical kind of ownership thing going on. This cosmic turf war, it's cosmic geography. After lunch we'll talk about where Jesus goes in certain places and what he says in certain places actually matters, because those places have a very deep history in some of this cosmic geographical stuff. And so Jesus goes to certain places and says things very deliberately. Again, he knows what this place is associated with, and he has some things to say. And again, his readers, the original context, they're going to know too. But we miss a lot of these things as we go through. Anyway, let's just stop there, and we can sort of create a new schedule.